Before my sermon this morning, I'm going to do something I've never done, but feel compelled to just make a few comments about this week's election. Non-partisan, but I think some things need to be said as Christian people, things that we need to think about and consider. People keep telling me that we're maybe more divided now as a country than we have been in a long time. And depending on who I talked to this week, some people were ecstatic and elated and optimistic. Other people were scared to death. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. It's a big, long, one of those Swedish or Norwegian names that I can't pronounce. Bishop Ann is the bishop of the Minneapolis Synod. And she wrote to her congregations and all of her pastors right after the election, and I think it was really good counsel, and I want to share just a portion of this with all of you this morning. She wrote, "What happens after an election, especially one as divisive as this? What is the role of the church, the synod, the congregation? As in all elections, there are winners and losers. Most of us learned as children about the appropriate responses to such events. After losing the state basketball championship or winning the student council election, we were told, don't go vote, be humble and gracious, show respect for the opponent, and learn from the experience. These attributes may be most needed and most difficult to achieve after an election like this. Whether it's an election year or not, we are constantly asking ourselves how to live as faithful disciples. During these coming days, I invite you to enter deeply into God's gifts to the church." And then she provides some suggestions. Read an entire gospel in one sitting. Read the small catechism. That only takes about 30 minutes. Review the social statements approved by the ELCA in church-wide assemblies. We have a number of social statements that talk about how we are to deal with one another in terms of poverty and race and women's issues and all kinds of things. And then she also said, read about Luther's thought on the role of government. In an article written by theologian George Furwell, he argues that at least 4 of Luther's teachings speak as clearly and accurately to our time as they did to the 16th century. 1 is the proper concern of government is the earthly welfare of all. The second thing Luther said is that Christian citizens, are called to support the government in its proper work, the promotion of the earthly welfare of all, to the best of their ability. The Lord will hold us no less responsible for our failures to use our political opportunities to serve the neighbor than for our failures to serve. 3, Luther insisted that Christians ought to see to it that their children receive the education which will qualify them for competent government service. It is not enough to know how to complain about the failures of government. One must learn how to help. Luther said, if you find that you are qualified, you should offer your services, that the essential governmental authority may not be despised and become enfeebled or perish. For the world cannot and dare not dispense with it. And fourthly, Luther claimed that every criticism of our government should be understood as an implicit criticism of ourselves. This should teach us to begin a critical national self-examination with ourselves and work our way up, rather than to start with our leaders and never critically examine ourselves. Once we have understood this, a great deal more realism will enter into our political thinking. And then she writes, we are in different places following the election. Some are ecstatic, while others feel great loss. The Apostle Paul calls us to weep with those who weep. I hope we will be attentive to one another in this time. Remember, Paul does not call us to fix those who weep, or explain things to those who weep, or point out all the good things to those who weep. There will come a time for hope and joy, but the person weeping gets to set the pace and the timing. not those of us who accompany them. It is in honesty and patience that healing comes. And Bishop Ann ends her note with this: please join me in prayer for each other, for all of our elected leaders, and for the welfare of all of God's creation. And she signs that in Christ. Okay, I felt it was important to share that. You may have noticed in the bulletin that I'm using the second lesson today. I like to do that once in a while, and I like to let you know if I'm doing that. You may have already won. We used to get those envelopes in the mail, remember those from Publishers Clearinghouse? I get most of that junk on the emails now that comes to me, but you may have already won. And how many times have you received a greeting in the mail which contains these 5 words? You may have already won. These are words that capture just enough of our imagination, for we will usually open up the envelope to examine the contents, right? And once you open the envelope, they gotcha! You become just like the elusive rainbow trout who is tempted by the brightly colored fly floating serenely on the water. Everything is just fine until the trout discovers that that fly contains a hook, which is attached to a line. You may have already won. I vividly remember many years ago, we received in the mail a large envelope that had Ed McMahon's picture on the front of it. That's how long ago this was. And the extra bold print on the envelope informed the Maxwell family of Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, that you may have already won $10 million. Well, our younger daughter, Katie, was still in grade school at the time. She was the first one to the mailbox that day, and she ran through the house screaming that we were now rich. Good fortune had indeed smiled on the Maxwell family that day. I mention this business about giveaways because they can trick us into making some rather unhealthy assumptions about the real intentions of the companies who send us these all too familiar greetings. St. Paul was addressing a kind of parallel problem when he wrote to the congregation in Thessalonians. You may have already won. Well, upon hearing a portion of the gospel, members from this young congregation seemed to suffer from a case of selective hearing. They heard the part about how Christ had freed them from their sins and about how they were accepted no matter what. And they heard the part about how Jesus would return again. And we've talked about this before, and I know we've had this conversation not only with me, but Pastor Foster and other preachers who've been here. When Jesus said he would return, a lot of people thought they were thinking like maybe next month or next year or in a little while, during my lifetime. Now they were told many other things, this congregation, but they only remembered what they wanted. And knowing that Christ accepted them, no matter what, and that he was coming back, probably in a couple of weeks or a month or whatever, they said, hey, let's party. We don't have to do anything. We can just hang out and wait until he comes. Upon hearing that he would return, many of the people quit their jobs and literally became lazy slobs. It's written a little bit nicer here in the scripture. A number of them even took up residence in homes of those who were sympathetic toward the Christian cause. And they literally were sponging off of it. They had a real attitude problem. Theirs was a gross misunderstanding of the message of the gospel. They made a bunch of assumptions based on their selective listening, and they were perfectly content with their decisions. These are the same folks who would probably believe they had a much better chance than an 18 million to 1 chance of winning the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. The point is, we need to take care so that we do not ground our theology in a sweepstakes kind of theology. And so there are a couple of assumptions here. First of all, this communicates to us the attitude that wonderful things happen to us and that abundant life comes to us by some predetermined system over which we have no control. All we have to do is sit there and bask in the glory of Christ's light, and everything wonderful will happen. And that there's no effort needed on our part whatsoever. It doesn't matter if we read 10 books, or 1 book, or no books. It doesn't matter if we help elderly ladies across the street, or if we stick our foot out and trip them as they're on their way. It doesn't matter because everything's already taken care of. All that matters with a sweepstake is a predetermined selection of winners. And you're asking to be told that you were among them. Many of Paul's followers had mistakenly interpreted Christianity for some kind of a big gravy boat that would always provide. And they didn't have to do anything except soak up the gravy. Think about it. What kind of a world would this be if no effort were required of us for anything? Suppose it's your first day of a new semester, and a professor were to stand in front of the class and announce to you, you may have already passed history. Think about that. All you have to do is hand in your name and your address and wait until the end of the semester. You will be notified by an impartial judging agency if you have passed. You don't even have to show up anymore. This kind of assumption is very foreign to our Christian faith. That's not how it works. The initial announcement in the Christian sweepstakes is not, you may have already won. It's not even, you may have already lost. Our Christian doctrine initially confronts us with the statement, you have lost. You've already lost. That's what sin is all about. Paul became so upset with the Thessalonians because they had taken the incredible sacrifice of Christ for granted. It is incomprehensible that God should love any one of us in this room. That is incomprehensible. And for us to take that love for granted, that is even more unbelievable. We are the recipients of God's love, not by some predetermined computer choice, but through an incredible sacrifice. Our posture should always be one of awe and thanksgiving. Our attitude should always be, what can I do? How can I help? In what ways can I become more engaged in my faith and in ministry? This is a love which really demands a response. Well, sure, we could just sit around like the Thessalonians, but that means that we will greatly miss the point. This is a world created by a God who loves us all equally, regardless of some random sweepstakes number, or the color of our skin, or the place of our birth. This God calls us to respond to God's love in freedom. Instead of wasting our time and our energy running after lucky numbers, we should turn our faces toward an open future, lift our hearts to God, and walk steadfastly in the disciplined way that leads to human dignity and fellowship with and through our loving God. It is in the name of the same God that we gather today. We pray. Amen. And may the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus. Amen. If you're comfortable doing so, please stand for the hymn of the day.